Happy to be joined now by the lead NFL analyst for Pro Football Focus, Sam Monson, good friend of the show. Sam, good to have you with us. And the timing could not have been better because you just put up a story at pff.com that basically asks the question, have the Buffalo Bills done enough this offseason to address their receiver room? We encourage you to check it out. I think it's pretty fair and balanced from front to back because I think some of your questions about it are valid. And I think some of your faith in the continuity that Josh Allen and maybe the offensive line provides are valid as well. I guess the question is, how much of a beat do you expect this offense to meet, knowing the trigger man, who is a unicorn, is largely the same?
Yeah, and then the other thing that wasn't really in the article too much is how much is the entire offense going to change, and pivot away from the type of system they've been running the last couple of years, where obviously Stephon Diggs was the focal point at receiver. How much are they going to lean on tight ends and, the more yards after the catch centric group that they have right now across the board? And so maybe what looks like a potential hole on the roster, we're kind of projecting that back to the last offense, relative to that system. It's a big hole. In the new system, it might not be that big of a gap. But you're right. Look, Josh Allen is one of those quarterbacks up there with Patrick Mahomes and, Joe Burrow and not too many others that can completely transcend supporting casts and make things work with a supporting group that other quarterbacks simply wouldn't be able to make function. So you have to have faith that a quarterback that good and a coaching staff overall as good as they've been are going to find a way of making it work. The question is just sort of how it's going to work with the collection of receivers that they've assembled since trading away Diggs.
Yeah, and certainly the way that Khalil Shakir emerged in the second half of last year. Dalton Kincaid certainly came into his own at the end of last season. Then Dawson Knox is a part of that. James Cook also is there. Those guys still there. Really the one guy that you're wondering about, Keon Coleman, if he comes and gets plugged in. Curtis Samuel maybe. I'm a little more proven that Curtis Samuel has been doing it with a list of quarterbacks that is less than stellar. And you would think going to a guy like Josh Allen would give him a boost. But still, it's still a question mark. Those are the things that really are on the flip side of the positive feelings you got about the Bills and the continuity going forward. The flip side are the question marks, the ex-receiver and the new guy that's coming in to replace Gabe Davis or whatever, Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel, if those are the two guys that do it. Those are the only two spots offensively that you really have to look like and say, well, we'll see. But the emergence of Kincaid and Shakir kind of give you an idea that, like, well, maybe they're not important until they hit the ground hit the ground running, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not really that they lack, talented players. It's more the dynamic within that offense and all the players that they have that look to be their best receivers, Kincaid, Khalil Shakir. These are all guys that operate best from the slot. I mean, Dalton Kincaid was basically a big slot receiver last season. Khalil Shakir has always been at his best operating from the slot. And then when you trade away Diggs, when you let Gabe Davis walk, those are two guys that did work outside, that could play that X position, defeat press coverage, win against single coverage on the outside, deep down the field. And that's the one thing that's a question mark with almost anybody that you look at on this receiving core, except, somebody like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who they just signed. He can absolutely do that. But obviously he's been very much a one-trick pony and a limited receiver in his own right, despite, the flip side of the Curtis Samuel thing. He's only had all pros throwing him the football between Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and now Josh Allen. So that's my real question mark. And in particular with Keon Coleman, I really liked Keon Coleman as a draft prospect, maybe more than his sort of profile suggests I should. There were a few red flags to his data or to his production. But the one thing that I think is concerning is he did not separate well against man coverage. It was in the bottom percentile last season at Florida State. Even if you include his Michigan State tape, he only gets to the 51st percentile, I think, in terms of separating against man coverage. That's what you need him to do if he's going to come in and play X receiver. I think he fits better in the slot, again, like a lot of these other guys. And I think he can be a very good receiver, but I worry a little bit if that's what's going to be asked of him, if they're going to say, hey, Diggs isn't here anymore. That's the hole in the team. We need an X receiver, and that's what you got to go and do.
Let me try to expand on that a little bit, Sam, if I could, because I'm just curious as to the metrics in measuring that, and if a quarterback's accuracy and ball placement is a part of that equation and coming up with that final figure. Because we've talked to a couple of Florida State people who basically said Jordan Travis sometimes put Keon Coleman in those contested situations based on ball placement and accuracy. Now, I'm not saying that's going to make up a majority of the situations that you guys are charting, but I'm wondering if that's an element that you factor into that metric.
Yeah, it shouldn't affect the separation metric that we're looking at, because that's being taken at the point the ball is put in the air as opposed to when the ball actually arrives. But it does absolutely affect his overall production, his overall profile coming out of Florida State. You only have to watch his tape for, a brief period of time to start getting frustrated at the quarterback play there and understand that it's not putting him in a great position to succeed. That's why I think that he can be a really good receiver. Like, I think his production is not as good as it could have been if he'd had better quarterback play. And that's why some of the red flags in his statistical profile at college, I do think, are a bit of a red herring, and he can overcome those. He does show really good feel for zone coverage and is quite quarterback friendly in terms of taking a step towards the football, late separation against zone coverage, taking a quick step away from a guy and into the space. I think there's a lot to like about Keon Coleman's profile, but I think the one thing that he just does not do particularly well is separate himself from man coverage.
And looking back at last year with this Bills offense, Joe Brady certainly taking over at half of the season to go, and they go 6-1 down the stretch, win their last 5. What did you notice about where this offense might evolve to, particularly given the skill set that now we're talking about with Keon Coleman and Curtis Samuel, along with Shakir and Kincaid and Cook and all that stuff? Where do you see this evolving to from where it was under Ken Dorsey?
I actually don't think we saw a big sort of schematic shift in the system once he came in. I think what we saw is him kind of putting his slant on the Ken Dorsey offense, and this is the season we're going to see whatever schematic paradigm shifts are in there. But I think you almost sort of get an inclination based off the personnel they've assembled, and it does make sense for them to start getting the ball in these receivers' hands much more horizontally, using run after the catch skills. Kincaid is good after the catch. Shakir is good after the catch. Curtis Samuel, like almost everybody they have on this team right now, excels with the ball in their hands after the catch. So that's what I wonder if we're going to start to see, is a shift in, lower average depth of target, much more horizontal attacking with this offense and getting the ball out quickly and taking advantage of the athletes that they have with getting them the ball.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because Curtis Samuel is a guy that people are curious to see, and knowing that he and Joe Brady have a prior relationship down in Carolina in the 2020 season, which was also the most productive of Samuel's career, 77 for 851 and 3 touchdowns, and a catch rate of almost 80%, a lot of that being short, near to the line of scrimmage, and then Samuel does the rest after the catch. Would you anticipate that he uses him the same exact way, or do you foresee maybe a different type of role for him if he maybe moves up in the receiving pecking order, knowing Diggs is no longer here?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that is his starting point. He knows that he can do that. He can do a good job in that particular role that he had in Carolina. I would imagine they're going to give him an opportunity to see if he can do more. And if you go back all the way back to his Ohio State tape, he was a real vertical threat in that offense as well. Like, he made a lot of big plays deep down the field. So I do wonder if they're going to try and use him a little bit more in that way. Now, a lot of those plays came, they weren't necessarily Stephon Diggs type of plays where he's beating press man coverage on the outside. There were a lot of releases from the slot or even out of the backfield, and he didn't have to deal with the kind of press man coverage that he would if he's stepping into that Diggs role. But yeah, I do wonder if they try and expand his role from Carolina a little bit and use him more as a vertical option.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the stuff that's going on around the league with, Jared Goff just signed a contract extension. You've got Daniel Jones, who's coming into a second or third year of his contract, new contract. And the Texans now they're looking to take a new approach for 2020. They're a different team than they were just 18 months ago. I mean, we know so much more about them. What are some of the things, particularly this quarterback market, when you've got guys like Daniel Jones making $40 million and Tua sitting in Miami waiting for his turn to get paid? How do you think this is going to turn out, not only in Miami, but also the ramifications of Jared Goff signing a deal the way he did?
Yeah, the Jared Goff deal was big money. You know, people speculated maybe the Lions were going to try and find some kind of middle tier quarterback deal for Jared Goff. You know, the understanding that he probably isn't the top tier of quarterbacks. But they gave him pretty much top of the market money. Not quite the best paid quarterback in the NFL, but pretty close. And really resoundingly answered that they're going to give him elite money and believe that within their team and the players that he has to throw to, and Ben Johnson at offensive coordinator calling the plays, he can play at the required level they need him to. I think Miami, you know, the price tag obviously goes up for Tua, but I think they're in a similar boat. They're going to end up giving Tua top of the market money, a similar deal to Jared Goff for similar reasons. The contract that I think it makes interesting, though, is Dallas and Dak Prescott. They struggled to get him signed the last time around, and it cost them in terms of both overall money of that deal, but also the structure of the deal became a contract that is a problem for Dallas. And now they're kind of doing the same thing. They're dragging this out. The price tag is only going upwards. I do wonder if there is a real chance that eventually they can't get that deal done, and Dak Prescott becomes a surprise, you know, available quarterback next year.
Looking at the AFC, it seems to get only more and more competitive with teams, you know, securing young quarterbacks in the draft the last several years, fortifying their rosters, both on offense and defense. Who do you think has kind of helped themselves with this most recent draft class the most on the AFC side of the ledger, that's kind of maybe vaulted themselves up a tier in what's going to probably be a very competitive AFC playoff race?
They have, I think, the toughest schedule in the NFL this year, but I really like the offseason that the Pittsburgh Steelers had. You know, when you consider where they were from a quarterback standpoint, I think they did the best thing possible with that situation. They moved on from Kenny Pickett. They brought in Justin Fields. They brought in Russell Wilson. They're paying Russell Wilson virtually nothing. I think he counts for around $1 million on their salary cap because all the pain is being taken by Denver. Justin Fields is a cheap option as well. Either one of those guys is an upgrade over the football that Kenny Pickett played a year ago. And they had a great draft again. Second year in a row, they've had a really good draft. And, you know, their baseline with Mike Tomlin at the coach, it tends to be extremely high. So I really like what the Steelers have done. I just wonder if it's enough because that schedule is so tough, you know, whether we're going to see it, evidence of it on the field in wins and losses.
And then you look at the surprise pick of the draft probably was Mike Penix by the Falcons, a team that looked like they wanted to get better, made a move to get Kirk Cousins, and then to take Mike Penix, who's old for a rookie to begin with, and then you sit there and you draft him, and he's going to sit behind, you know, Kirk Cousins for what, year, 2 years, and he'll be 26 at the time he even takes the reins if things go according to plan. Really kind of a head scratcher there for Atlanta, a team that didn't do well last year and looking to take a big step forward, taking a draft pick on a guy that's going to sit for 2 years no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unprecedented move. I think we've seen versions of this type of move with the Aaron Rodgers selection with Jordan Love to replace Aaron Rodgers. You know, way back in the 90s, Denver drafted Tommy Maddox in the first round when they had John Elway at the peak of his powers. Teams have done that before, but they've never done it with a top 10 draft pick. You know, that's what makes this unprecedented. And they've never done it having just signed a quarterback a few weeks before in free agency. So all of these elements together is what makes that completely unprecedented. But I think, you know, you've heard the team reference the Jordan Love, the Green Bay model multiple times since that. And I think that's really what this comes down to, is they believe that there is merit to that Jordan Love succession plan and that a quarterback can sit and learn on the sideline for a couple of years and get better and have a better chance of being a good player once he finally gets into the starting lineup, regardless of whether he's 21 or 24. It's those 2 years of adjustment into the NFL that's the valuable part. And if they're right, that might be more valuable than any single player they could take in the top 10 this year. Getting that sort of succession plan right and securing not just the best football for the next couple of years, but the next 10 years of this franchise, that's what they're banking on.
Last one for you, Sam. You already referenced how tough the Steelers' schedule is, and it is a bear. I mean, there's no doubt about it. They're part of that group of 4 teams that are playing on Christmas Day and essentially have 3 games in 10 or 11 days late in the season. To me, that's a daunting task for any team, even if they go into it healthy, to expect bodies to respond in a way where the quality of your football play is going to measure up with each successive game with less rest after each one of them. I realize they tried to even that out by having those same 4 teams on similar schedules, but I'm curious, what's your kind of take on that, and how much do you think the product might suffer?
Yeah, it's pretty rough. It's hard not to see that as a massive competitive disadvantage for those teams with that short week of rest. Pittsburgh in particular, the 2 games back to back in really short succession are both really tough opponents as well. So they get hit doubly hard by that. Look, we know that the NFL is going to do whatever the NFL thinks makes the most money, and stuffing Christmas Day with a couple of games makes them a lot of money with those extra, Netflix coming into this as well. So it's a tough, it's tough for the teams that are stuck with it. I think you're right. It's probably likely to result in some less than optimal football as well, but it's all in the pursuit of the NFL's expansion.
Yeah.
Sam, thanks so much.
Anytime, guys. Take it easy.